So I just want to introduce everybody. If you don't know, we have Nate Wall, our head winemaker for Troon Vineyard, and Micah Wagner, our assistant winemaker at Troon Vineyard, joining us tonight to kind of go over these wine club wines that everybody should have just received or picked up recently for our April release. And there's nobody better to talk about those wines than these two. So I'm going to get out of their way and let them do it. And then please feel free to have a conversation. I think that they both love to talk about the things that they are doing and are going to be doing. So please feel free to ask them questions.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so few, people here. That's why, everyone can just, stay with their mics off, and you can just, whenever you have a question, just pop on in and ask it. But Micah and I get the privilege of being able to have all of the wines open tonight that we are going to be tasting. I presume we're the only ones doing that. But if you guys do have a particular wine that you're drinking right now, let us know, and we can talk more specifically about anything that you're drinking. But I thought we would just start our conversation. We'll just go through the four wines that were in this wine club release. And so that means we are going to start talking about. Oh, that's weird. Okay, there we go. We're going to start talking about it like disappears when it goes over. Okay, maybe I'll turn off that background. But the Ascendant Rosé. So this is a 2023 rosé, and we're just now releasing it. And part of that is because we actually wanted to make a rosé that was meant to be a little more of like an age-worthy wine. Like most rosés are like one of the first things that gets bottled every year. So we'll make the wine and we'll try to bottle it in. Some people will try to bottle it in, January or February sometimes, just a couple months later, after harvest in the fall. So a lot of rosés are just very kind of quick to market, and are meant to just kind of they're always meant to be very simple and just not a lot behind it. And we wanted yeah so but so this rosé was meant to be able to kind of go the distance and show that rosés can also be kind of complex and interesting wines that have a lot of like layers and depth to them as well. So I kind of wanted to talk you through the kind of ingredients of this wine. And mainly because I bet you a lot of these grapes are things that you haven't encountered before. And obviously, Micah, jump in if you want to say anything. But there's five different grapes in this wine, and it's mostly Cinsault, along with Mourvèdre, Grenache, Counoise, and Carignan. And so all five of those grapes are red grapes, and they're also going to be showing up in a lot of our red wines. So like one of them, Mourvèdre, you've got a red version of in this club, the one that we fermented and then aged in amphora. But these kind of five grapes that I just mentioned are especially with the addition of Syrah, which there is no Syrah on this, but those are kind of like the dominant grapes from the Rhone Valley region. And those grapes they've all kind of grown together for millennia in this southern part of France, and they all just really go well together. And so we for this wine we actually harvested some of them separately, and then fermented them all separately and ended up blending them later. Sometimes if grapes are available at the same time, if they're ripening at the same rate, we can harvest them together and we can co-ferment them. So like where we actually press the grapes together and like ferment the juice of like different grapes together. But in this particular case, the first one, the Cinsault, was actually the earliest ripening, and that ripened on September 15th. And then the last one was the Counoise, and that didn't ripen until October 18th. So a full month later. So, there was, multiple weeks between when these grapes were ready, when we picked the first and the last grapes. So these were all, in terms of the process, these were all picked, separately, and then we fermented them separately. Micah, do you want to say anything I mean, so Micah did not get to make this particular wine as a 2023, but she did help bottle it. So
I did. Well, so I'll say, I look at the emails that everyone in the wine club gets and our posts. And so I know that we like to inform you of how things are made, but I'll just maybe as a reminder to some people, maybe it's the first time they've heard, but Nate mentioned 5 different grapes and he talked about how we separately press and then ferment them. So they're kind of their own little worlds and they're also in barrels during this time. So they go through their fermentation separately, their malolactic fermentation separately, and then we get into the fun part of blending. So as you know, we have a few different rosés that we carry, and everything from the time of, bud break in the spring, like right now for our 2025s, we're already kind of looking at how things are going in the vineyard. We've planned what we think is going to be used for what. So when we make a rosé like this, there's actually more steps to it than even just creating the wine itself. It's also growing the grapes and then seeing how they're doing and if we actually want to use those for the rosé or for something else. And then if it is for the rosé, which one? So that's why you get such a variety year to year. If you've been a club member for a while, there are a lot of differences vintage to vintage, and with color too, for example, it's like, we press and we ferment and we're not so much worried about the look of it. We more so want to make sure that the chemistry and the taste are exactly what we're looking for. I'm not sure. I mean, have you all had multiple rosés of ours before?
No.
No. Have you had any of ours? Have you opened this one yet or?
I didn't buy this one. I'm not a fan of rosés.
Okay.
But I did have a question.
Yeah.
Do they taste differently if they're co-fermented versus blended later?
yeah, I saw your message in the chat. Thanks for bringing that up. I think it's a really cool thing, and it's actually a reason why we love co-fermenting when we can, because basically, if you ferment them separately, let's say you have A and B, you pick them, do them separately, and then when you blend them together, you have like AB, right, of some way. But if you co-ferment them, you can have like C co-fermented with D, and you might actually get like an E or an F, right? Like fermentation is it's this alchemical soup, right? Where the yeast there's all sorts of chemistry going on. It's warm, like a lot of enzymatic activity going on. And as the yeasts are like, metabolizing that sugar, creating alcohol, creating all these other aroma and flavor compounds, they're kind of like, a toddler with like a whole bunch of different Legos spread out on the floor. And they don't care that they're the same color or not. They'll just start sticking everything together. So if you give them different building blocks, you give them different varieties, they'll start taking some building blocks from both varieties and stick them together. So co-ferments are inherently kind of, each time you do a co-fermentation, you almost make like a new variety for just that one time. It clearly has aspects of both of its, parents, but it can be something unique in and of itself. So if we get the opportunity to do that, I love being able to do that because it's obviously it's more harmonious than blending as well, right? So of course, what we do is we spend a lot of time trying to make these wines as harmonious as possible, making sure all the parts fit together, like without gaps and rough edges or anything, like as we're, intellectually, as we're trying to put these wines together. But co-fermentations, they blend just really seamlessly because they're basically blending during fermentation. So that's a fun part about that. Another thing, I guess I'll just, I had written some quick little notes, but like almost like cheat sheets of like what each of these varieties kind of bring to this rosé. And so like Cinsault, especially because I think a lot of people have probably never had the opportunity to try any of these grapes independently. You can find them, like you can find 100% versions of all of these grapes. It's a little trickier on the Counoise, but you can do it, but they're often found in blends. But the reason we use Cinsault is giving kind of the soft, like red fruit aspect of the that's in this rosé, whereas Mourvèdre is kind of like a darker, more savory, and like a fuller, like more textural aspect of it is what Mourvèdre is bringing to it. Grenache brings a lot of brings like acidity and kind of like what would be a backbone of like a rosé or a white wine, is that acidity. Grenache is bringing kind of that backbone. It's also actually bringing higher alcohol, because Grenache puts on a lot more sugar than these other varieties, but even still the alcohol of this wine is only like 12.5%, so it's pretty lower level. But then Counoise, this also brings acidity, but it brings this like lush fruitiness and a little bit of like a minerality. And then Carignan always brings this kind of like spicy character to it that just adds to complexity and depth. So kind of getting all those together, that's kind of why when you taste it, I think you'll get fruit in here. You'll also get some kind of like cool, almost salinity, like there's like a bit of a saline. And sometimes when people talk about like minerality in wine, which is kind of a difficult concept, but if you think of like a mineral water minus the bubbles, kind of like some of that flavor, there's like both a salinity and a slight minerality to this rosé, which I really enjoy about it. But all of these grapes really adds to that kind of that depth and that length of this wine, and that's what you don't find in a lot of other rosés. So this is why this is the first time we made a rosé that we wanted to call an Ascendant Rosé, like our kind of we're trying to like showcase just a deeper, more complex blend of grapes from Troon. And so this was the first rosé we've ever made for this particular. Yeah. I guess in case you haven't opened yours yet, other hints would be this rosé, as well as actually most of our rosés and whites, are better served a little warmer than you're probably used to serving a rosé or a white wine. So a lot of people, take them out of their fridge and they're, like 38 degrees, 37 degrees. Ours have like so many like really interesting aromatics and everything in it that like if it's a little bit warmer, you actually appreciate that more. So sometimes if you bring it out of the fridge, like let it sit out for like half an hour or 45 minutes, and then it'll probably be at a closer temperature to what you want to enjoy it at. More, it's actually it's definitely not like room temp in terms of like 68, but more like 50, 55 degrees is a good temperature for to enjoy this.
Yeah. We actually started it at 60 because I just pulled it out of the basement and we're gradually cooling it off. So we'll let you know how, but it's not, I've had some rosés that at 60 are pretty angular. You didn't want to drink them up there, but this is actually pretty good even at 60.
Thank you for that.
What are your notes on it? What do you think?
Tell us. What do you think?
Well, that's a good question. So, part of it's that we're doing very small amounts at a time because we're trying to cool it off.
Okay. There's no wrong answer, by the way. Yeah. Everyone's palate is different.
But it kind of reminds me, not surprisingly, it's got a lot of Grenache in it because we're home winemakers. I've made a Grenache rosé, and it feels a lot like that but with more acid.
Yeah.
I just like to say that, we're like you make, we're not rosé all day people. But this is a good one. And I like it.
I'll have to get some.
Yep.
And I have to say, there's we drunk a Cinso from Chile, which I liked very much. And I wonder if the Troon has any intentions to make that as a standalone.
Yeah, so we have made so Cinso has always been a component for us. It's a component in this rosé. It's a component in our Glou Glou, which we'll have in a couple minutes here. And it's also a component in our Druid's Red. So it's always been a blend in blends for us. I would like to consider Cinso as a standalone, as like maybe a small like wine club release only. When we have even more of our vineyard producing, so we have more grapes that we can dedicate to these like fun little like side projects like this. I think Cinso would be a really interesting one to have as a standalone wine, but we haven't made one yet. But I think we would like to. So maybe I don't know about 2025, maybe 2026 though. We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of never. We never say never, and also Nate and Micah are always so wonderful and take our requests into consideration when I'm asking for more additional small lots specifically for our wine club members. So we
Well, I went to my doctor recently, and he said, "I'll see you next year," which I think is a good thing at my age when your doctor says, "I'll see you next year." So we can wait.
good.
Yeah, no, that's the great thing about wine club is that like that's I don't need to. I'm allowed to basically be able to make fairly small blends if we can, and just we won't even sell it. We won't put it into distribution. It'll only be for the wine club. So yeah, as we continue to get more and more of our vineyard producing, we hope to be able to do more and more of that. Have special wines that are only sent out to the wine club. Because for me that just means 3 or 4 barrels. Like that's it. That's all that will exist of that wine. But it does allow us to maybe, set aside just a couple of barrels of Cinso or a couple of barrels of Mourvèdre or something like that, that really make unique wines by themselves as well. So speaking of unique wines, I'll move on to the next one I want to talk about. Let's see, this does not work. But here's the Ascendant Amber.
Just put it kind of in front of your face a little bit. I think
right? Like
that's better. Yeah, there you go.
It disappears the second the bottle goes. Okay, but there you go. So this is our 2023 Ascendant Amber, and just like the first was the Ascendant Rosé, the Ascendant, which right now we only have an Ascendant Rosé and Ascendant Amber. Ultimately, we will have an Ascendant White and an Ascendant Red, but those are meant to reflect kind of like a certain kind of upper, higher tier of quality in terms of like something that is always going to be a blend of grapes from like multiple parts of our property. So it's kind of showing off like multiple parts of what Troon does and like bringing them all together. So we don't feel like we can make like when I make something and we put an Ascendant label on there, I want it to really impress. And so I don't feel like we've got like that like upper level of our whites and our reds yet in terms of like that real wow factor. I mean, I like all of our wines, but we will be coming out with that shortly, but not yet. So right now there's 2, and you get both of them in this wine club shipment, which is great. But yes, thank you for that. The amber wines I think are often the most fun to make. And certainly the most fun, like our interns, like every year, if you ever ask them what their favorite wine was that they worked on, they'll almost always say the amber wines. And anyone who has this wine open right now, and if you can just imagine how good this smells now, imagine like during fermentation when it's like warm and it's just like, just giving off aromatics just like crazy. Because amber wines, orange wines are always the most aromatic of all wines out there. And I presume people know this, but just kind of quick review that just like rosés are red grapes, but they're treated like a white grape, right? So to make a rosé, we harvest red grapes, we press it, and then we basically ferment the juice just like we would for a white wine. The amber wine is the opposite of a rosé grape. So this is when we take white grapes and treat them like a red wine, right? So we harvest white grapes that normally would get pressed and fermented their juice as a white wine. This is where we harvest the grapes and we ferment them, the whole grapes together, just like we would with red wines, and we make an amber wine. And yeah, so I think the aromatics are just always so interesting on amber wines, and this one's no exception. This one's made with Vermentino, Viognier, and Grenache Blanc. We've also used Roussanne from in certain years. This year, we wanted to experiment with Grenache Blanc. It's the first time that we've done an orange amber Grenache Blanc, and we really liked how it turned out. So we have more of that for the 2024 and in the future because we were very happy with it. But so yeah, I don't know, Micah, I've been talking a lot. What do you want to say about this?
So like Nate mentioned, it's a different process, obviously, that we go through where you kind of get a different side to each of these grapes, right? So, for example, if some of you have had our Vermentino, you get to experience it in a totally different way. When we ferment these, I'm referring to this vintage, but it's like whenever you make an orange wine, when you're draining and pressing it, just the color, the texture, the flavor, like everything kind of comes together. And typically as a winemaker, when you're going through a pressing, you're tasting as you go periodically. Everyone has a different way of doing this, but it's like you might kind of be making what we call press cuts. So depending on how much wine you're going to get out of whatever it is you're pressing, you're trying to see when the acid changes, how the flavor changes throughout this, and just consistently. I mean, you're getting way more out of an orange wine than you would if you just immediately press it, put it into barrel as a white wine, and ferment it. So if you are a fan of our wines in general, this is kind of a cool way to compare how specific grapes turn out depending on how you farm them, but then also just how you treat them in the cellar. Has anyone opened this one, or did you all receive this in your Meg? I saw you're a big fan, actually, Meg. Thank you.
So, I mean, just as an aside, I poured this wine last night for an event where 33 Master Somms were in the Willamette Valley, and
Ooh.
This was by far their favorite wine. They commented on the aromatics. But do you want to talk a little bit about like how much skin contact there is with this and what that does?
Yeah. So these ones were also blends in terms of these ones are harvested at different times. So we have Vermentino, Viognier, and Grenache Blanc were picked at different times, and we treated them very similar to our red ferments, which for us means we had they were all a little bit different, but we basically had some whole cluster, which means that since we manually harvest as opposed to mechanically harvest our fruit, that means we actually have a person individually cutting off each cluster of fruit, which means that we can choose to use entire clusters or to use destemmed and just use individual berries. And we almost always do some combination of both. So on these, I would say in general, it's about a third whole cluster. where those hull clusters are on the bottom of the fermenter, and then we destem the fruit on top of that. And then those fermenters, like all of our orange wines and our red wines, are actually, we ferment outdoors. And so we kind of start. Some people talk about like a cold soak for wines, particularly in the Willamette Valley. When they talk about Pinot Noir, a lot of people like do an intentional cold soak where they'll put the fruit after they've processed it in whatever way, after they've either done whole cluster or destemmed it. They'll put it into a stainless steel tank that has jackets around it so they can cool it down, and they'll hold it at a cold temperature for some period of time. They're doing that with Pinot Noir because Pinot Noir can ferment very quickly over, like once it does start fermenting, it might ferment in like 4 or 5 days, like, and then it's done. And so they're trying to give time beforehand to extract all, like some of the interesting flavors, colors, aromas, things that are present in the skin before they press it off of the skins. But with our wines, we pick them. It's generally quite cold in the mornings in the fall, so those grapes are coming in at like 34, 35 degrees. Like your fingers are going numb on the sorting table sometimes. But they're outdoors, so we just do an ambient soak. So it takes several days, 4 or 5 days, for these wines to start fermenting themselves. Like all of our ferments are spontaneous. We don't add any yeast. We don't add any sulfur, enzymes, sugar, water, acid. It's just the grapes. And so after that 4 or 5 day period for the fermentation to start, then they generally do ferment for anywhere between, like I'd say around 3 weeks is the time frame that it takes most of these. So another a week on skins maybe as they're warming up to get warmer. And interestingly enough, during that time, that's when a lot of really cool microbiology happens. Because ultimately, when it gets warmer, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, Saccharomyces cerevisiae is going to be the dominant. That's like the yeast, like the wine yeast, the beer yeast, basically. Saccharomyces cerevisiae. But before that, becomes really dominant. There's this kind of playground for a lot of other non-Saccharomyces yeasts and other aspects of like what is basically our native vineyard microbiome. They can put their little thumbprints on the wine for those first several days. So that's a really important part for us to allow, like, really that's scientific studies are basically finding that this concept of terroir, like the sense of like a taste of place, like where wines from a certain place taste consistent, and sometimes that can even be like within a valley or something, like wines even made by different producers all have certain similarities. They're finding that a lot of those similarities are actually microbial, and it's because of the so people who would this is mostly in the old world where people do make wine more similar than the way that we do, which is spontaneous ferments, not a lot of additives. And when you add all these things, when you add sulfur, a bunch of sulfur at crush, you kind of disrupt that entire microbiome, so you don't really get those effects. But we don't do that. So that initial period is really when a lot of that really kind of unique character of our wines are developed. And that's a direct reflection of our biodynamic farming practices, regenerative organic farming practices. We're actually farming our vineyard. First of all, we're not spraying things that kill and disrupt these microbiome. It actually, our farming practices encourage diversity, and both microbially, and macrobially, microscopic life and macroscopic life. Yeah, but this is that time frame, that initial time frame where you really get a lot of the advantages of doing that. So, but yeah, to very not exactly answer that question. Fermentation is generally like a 3 to 4 week process for us. Largely because we don't use one, it's outdoors. We don't use temperature controls, so we don't artificially chill it and then artificially heat it up to try to encourage that fermentation to go. We just rely on the ambient temperatures, and we just move the fermenter. The fermenters are about like 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet roughly. And we can pick them up with forklift. And if they're warming up, we kind of keep them in a sunnier spot. And like once they start fermenting and they seem happy, we move them to this little zen spot, like back underneath these oak trees. It's nice and shaded, and like it's just very peaceful. And that's where they kind of do their fermentations. Yeah.
But when you're doing that ambient soak, what kind of temperatures is the monk at?
Yeah, so temperatures, like I said, start off in like the upper 30s. And ultimately, it'll take, several days for the temperatures to finally get into maybe like the mid 50s. At that level, that's when you can really start getting activity of some of these other non-Saccharomyces yeasts. And those actually start heating the ferment up faster. And so, or I shouldn't say a ferment yet because it's not really fermenting, but it starts heating that fermenter up faster. And so by the time we actually get active ferments, our ferments are generally in the upper 60s to low 70s, pretty much for the entire time. Every once in a while, like what's interesting is in 2024, for us, outdoor temperatures don't just affect the growing of the grapes, they also affect our ferments. And so 2024, we had a very warm fall. Like it was, in the, it got into the 80s in the end of September, which is very unusual for us. And that actually warmed up our ferments a little more. So we actually saw some of our fermentation temperatures in the low 80s, which is unusual for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. So even reds, you're usually fermenting in around 70 then.
Correct. Yeah. So ours are long, slow, cool ferments generally because that's just what they do. Yep. And there's very different, there's different approaches in that, right? The warmer a ferment is, the more extraction you're going to get, like in terms of the more you can pull out. However, cooler ferments are also longer. And so you're also extracting, you're getting kind of stuff out of the skins, out of the grapes that way. So we do very minimal. So we only do one punch down a day. This is for both the ambers and the red wines, which so as the ferment is fermenting, it creates a cap. Basically, all the CO2 that's given off, the grapes almost like become little reverse parachutes, and the CO2 like pushes up the berries to the top. And so you have all the liquid down here and all the berries up here. And we want the berries to be in the liquid. So you physically punch that down. You can either use your hands, you can use punch down tools. You can jump in there and like push with your feet, depending on like what's going on. Like the I Love Lucy episode, that does actually happen from time to time. Yeah, again, I've been talking a lot. Micah, jump in here.
I was about to say, I didn't want to cut you off, but I will also say, we're making low intervention wines here at Troon. And so Nate described that, there are different ways you can go about this, right? From my experience, I won't speak for him, but I think we have a similar background in that, if you find a way to properly understand what's going on your property or wherever your grapes are coming from, if you're making wine in this style, for us, we're farming a certain way. We know every varietal. We know exactly what we want to do with it. And Nate's obviously had multiple vintages here. So if you can find a way to do this sustainably, like he's mentioning, we're not counteracting different things. We're not saying, okay, let's find a way to heat this up as fast as possible or cool it down as fast as possible. A lot of people don't understand the science behind this in the same way as he does. And so if you can have a longer, a little bit slower ferment, what I've seen over the years is that you actually get more interesting flavors. And you can do this, but it kind of freaks out winemakers sometimes. It's like, oh, if I just add X, Y, and Z and I take these steps, then boom, my wine's gonna be done on this day at this time. And you're guaranteed that product. And based on what yeast and other products you're using, how it's going to taste. But for us, we have something in mind. Obviously, we know what Syrah, for example, from our Block 3 tastes like, but we want to actually see what it tastes like that vintage, and we want to see what it can do, right? And then we also want to be sustainable in our practices, not just farming biodynamically, but it's like, can we find other ways to be a little more resourceful when we're actually working with these grapes? Because, a lot of facilities can kind of just go through certain motions that they've learned and not really think about it a little bit, in a different light. And so Nate's been very creative with the way we've put this together.
Cool.
And sustainability is an interesting point because it actually takes a lot of energy. I kind of like intimated this earlier, but like if you chill down like thousands of pounds of grapes, right? Like that takes a lot of energy to get them cold and then to hold them cold, and then even more energy to heat them back up. So like you can like really like burn through a lot of carbon that way if you're like actually tracking your carbon footprint like we do. And so ours are that's just solar power, man. You're just putting them in the sunshine when they need to warm up, and just in the shade when they're fine. So that's free. That's going to happen no matter what. So it is we've kind of adapted a winemaking style to be minimal intervention, not just in the winemaking, but also just kind of in the footprint too of that winemaking, right? Like everything's more minimal. So that is a goal of ours. We also just recently completed our solar barn. So we have solar power, which is powering basically 100% of our operations right now, which is really cool. So yeah, that was a big victory for us to move over. And we have a lot of our farm equipment now is electric. We still have our tractors that are diesel, but those they just last forever. So there's not like a really good reason to get rid of a perfectly good tractor just to make it electric. So if and when we need to replace one of the tractors, the next tractor will probably be an electric tractor. But for the time being, though, we've transitioned as far as we can across to a lot of renewable and renewable powered vehicles and equipment when we can too. So last thing I want to say about orange before we move on to the next wine, the Glou Glou, is that obviously the aromatics are amazing, but there's the superpower of amber wines is that they're very versatile in terms of like what you compare them with. They do just really well in places that can be tricky for other things. So like everybody likes doing wine and cheese, but like quite frankly, like a lot of cheeses don't pair that well with most wines. Orange wine almost always pairs really well with lots of cheeses, even really difficult ones to pair with, like blue cheese, which has a love-hate relationship for a lot of people, I know. But if you happen to love it, amber wines in general, and this one in particular, pairs really well with blue cheeses. We have a collective arrangement with Rogue Creamery, and so the Rogue blue cheese, like we've paired these before, and it's just really, really good. So they actually use our Syrah leaves to wrap around their Rogue blue cheese, and they have another blue cheese called Blue Horn where they actually soak it in some of our Syrah as well. So we've got like a partnership going with Rogue Creamery, which is like really fun for both.
Great.
Yeah.
Can you tell me like what is your suggested maximum shelf life for these wines before that you can drink them before they're going to kind of go bad on you, like some whites do?
Sure. Yeah. So let's see here. So the rosé actually still has quite a lot of time to it. It was meant to be an age-worthy rosé, and it'll change a lot as it ages. Like some of the fruitiness will start diminishing, and it'll like broaden and kind of get I don't know, like deeper toned, if that makes sense. But I mean, I think it's tasting great right now for the rosé. So I don't really recommend like holding on to it. But if you get a couple and you want to hold on to a couple, I bet you it'll be really interesting in another several years. But for most rosés, I wouldn't necessarily hold on to them for too long. Although this one, I would say you could do another 4 or 5 years just to see what it does. It should be pretty interesting over that time. The amber wine that we just got done pouring, that one's got quite a lot of time. So the amber's got a bunch of tannin in there. So just like a red wine, tannin kind of protects the wine. In amber wines, I always see the tannin. It's more like a tea-like tannin, almost like a black tea. That's how the tannin comes across to me in this wine. And I really like that. It's kind of unique to people who've never had orange wines before. They're used to texture in their red wines, the tannins being a certain way. And this has texture too, but it's coming from white grape tannins, which are similar but different than red grape tannins. So this one, I would say, this is 2023, easily 5 years if you want to. We've got some of our original orange wines that we've still been saving. So that was 2018. We've got some of those, and those are still tasting great. So I think this one 5 to 10 if you wanted to. The Glou Glou is the one exception to that. So that's the one we're moving on to right now. Glou Glou is a carbonic macerated wine, which we can talk about in a second. But this one is not meant to age. While it could age for a little while, the kind of charm of a Glou Glou comes from its youth, comes from it being kind of like a fresher, fruitier expression of these grapes. And so I would recommend this being consumed. It's not. There's no need. It won't benefit from aging. It can. All of our wines can, mainly because of how we make them, and like how we view oxygen exposure or not. The very minimal levels of sulfur our wines get, oddly, means that they age better because they're used to oxygen throughout their entire existence. It's not like it's this new thing that all of a sudden comes and disrupts a wine. And so, yeah. So this one, though, I would enjoy, in over the course of the summer for sure. And then the Mourvèdre, the last one we'll talk about is that definitely also has staying power. So that one will just change a lot again as it evolves. I think it's drinking really well right now, but I know that this one's got, this one could be a 10 plus for sure if you wanted to.
We got a pizza coming in 20 minutes, so Google will last that long.
There you go.
I love this planning. That's great.
All right, Micah, you want to start talking about some Glou Glou?
Yeah, sure. I actually, before we talk about that too, I wanted to touch on one thing because when we're talking about storing wine, Nate and I just had a conversation about this. Again, might be a reminder for some people, but you obviously don't want your wine to get hot, but because we don't filter at Troon, you also don't necessarily want to forget a bottle of white wine or rosé in the fridge for a really long time. It will be fine, but you'll just notice it'll look like a little bit of like crystals. It's tartrates in the bottom of your wine, could collect. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It just shows you that we're not doing anything. We're not finding and filtering our wine. But I just recommend, like, if you think, oh, I'm probably going to drink this, this summer, maybe don't immediately chill it now. And again, if you do forget about it, it'll be fine. And now you know what that is. But definitely don't let your wines get hot. So moving on to Glou Glou. So this is our 2024 Glou Glou, which is the first official wine actually that Nate and I made together that is now released. So it is 52% Cinsault and 48% Grenache, which is slightly different than last year's. I don't know if anyone has had our Glou Glou before, but as I was mentioning, year to year, all of our wines change slightly. But basically for this one, we do actually put it in a tank. So we immediately after hand harvesting all those grapes, we put them all in a stainless steel tank without processing or pressing or anything.
100%
Clusters. Oh, sorry, Nate.
Nope, I was just saying, yeah, 100% whole cluster.
Yeah, so we literally take, every cluster of grapes, it just goes in without even, smashing it, punch down, anything. They just go into a tank with a ton of dry ice. We seal it up. Every year is different, as we've explained for all of our wines, but this one was about 2 weeks that it remained just sealed, not touched. We don't take a sample of it, anything. So it's kind of fun because, we've mentioned for all of our wines, we don't really know exactly how it wants to turn out. But with our white and red wines, we do take the brix and temperature daily. So we're tracking that fermentation from the very start. And with this one, for 2 weeks, it's just in a tank. We're not tasting it. We don't know. We know what's going on, but we don't know exactly what's going on. And then we do a big dig out of that and we press it. And we actually had 4 different press fractions this year that we eventually do a little bit of a blending session for. And so this wine sees no oak, no amphora, no concrete or anything. It's just pure stainless steel. And it's kind of meant to just be drink young. It's a fruit forward, chillable red. You can choose how you enjoy it most. I really like this one a lot. It's typically one of my favorite styles of wine. But has anyone had the Glou Glou before? Any past vintages? Yeah? Okay, cool. I'm assuming no one has this one open right now.
Yeah.
Oh, yes?
Yeah, Pat and Mary Beth do.
What do you think?
You tell me what I'm supposed to taste. Scissors, paper, or rock?
You're not, no, that's everyone has a different palate. So you can taste, you can interpret it any way you may. Nate, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, just
Wait.
so people know about the whole dry ice thing is that you've probably remember this, but dry ice is interesting in that it sublimates. So that means it like goes from a solid to a gas, right? There's no liquid form. So when we're adding the dry ice into the tank, we're adding these pellets of dry ice, but then it basically fills the tank up with carbon dioxide, which is the reason we're doing it. And the reason we are putting it in a stainless steel tank specifically is because stainless steel is impervious, like unlike most of our other vessels, amphora, concrete, wood that have pores. Stainless steel does not, and we actually want to keep all of the carbon dioxide inside that tank because that's how we're actually going to prevent it from starting to ferment and do this carbonic thing instead, where it basically inside every single berry there is an enzyme that gets triggered by this carbonic this CO2 pressure, and the enzyme starts converting the sugars into alcohol. So it's not a yeast. It's not actually a ferment. It's a carbonic, we call it maceration. Basically, it just sits there and does its thing without, it is biological because it's enzymes that are doing it, but it's not a normal ferment for that part of it. So we do that carbonic part first in the stainless steel. And then when we press it, and this year, the color, so this year we co-fermented it. So we were asking about how co-ferments can be different. So the year prior, we fermented the Cinsault and we fermented the Grenache and we blended them. This year we were able to harvest both the Cinsault and Grenache at the same time. And like I said, if we can, I like to. So like we co-fermented it. And this year the color is much lighter. And that had to do with the co-ferment. So when we did the Cinsault and the Grenache separately, it was much darker. And when we did them together, it was much lighter. So that's just one of the differences of that. But carbonic, this style of wine, and the reason we call it Glou Glou, that's in French, that means glug glug. It's like the sound of the bottle emptying as you drink it very quickly, because this wine is meant to be, carbonic wines always have this kind of tutti fruity almost, like just very fruity kind of characteristic to it because it fermented inside the berries, right? So it wasn't getting a lot of the tannin and the texture that comes from the skins of the berries. that enzymatic process was happening inside. So it's like every little grape became its own fermenter, almost for the time being of that carbonic maceration. So yeah, it's just a fun, like fruitier wine. That still, though, especially because of the co-ferment, I think it has a lot of interesting complexity to it. And this is also very versatile for pairing. It's whenever you can get a red wine, which this is arguably a really dark rosé, just because of the color, but it is actually a red wine. It was 100% whole cluster for 2 weeks, so that was a long time to be on berries. But in that any wine like this that you can give a slight chill to, so just put this in your refrigerator, like maybe 15-20 minutes before you want to consume it. This wine's best with like a slight chill on it. So yeah.
How close to dry does it get with just the carbonic?
That's really different each year as well. And that also has to do with temperature. And again, we choose not to temperature control it. But if we did, we could have more consistency. But we like ours to reflect the vintage, and part of the vintage is temperature. But the warmer it is in the cellar, the warmer that tank is, the more enzymatic activity you have. Enzymes respond to temperature, right? The higher the temperature, the faster an enzyme can push a reaction forward. And so sometimes, let's say, I'll just use round numbers to make it easy, but so we use bricks to measure sugar. Let's say we had 20 bricks to start with as a simple number. Some years we might have 10 when we're done with the carbonic maceration. Some years we might have 15, 16, 17 even. So it's kind of different year to year how that goes, and it's strongly correlated to the temperature. So the higher the temperature in the cellar, in the not the barrel room, but this is in a different part of our cellar, in our tank room. So basically, the warmer it is outside, the warmer, this tank is going to be. So. Mm-hmm. Micah, do you want to talk about Mourvèdre? You even have the bottles. Yes,
I do.
This bottle.
I took one bottle home. So yeah, this is our 2023 Amphora Mourvèdre. We have a few blocks of Mourvèdre on our property. We just call it Mourvèdre for short typically, but we ferment these outside, as Nate has covered, in different bins. And so depending on the year, sometimes various blocks will go together or get pressed together. But eventually, after that fermentation process, however long it may be that year, this wine goes into amphora, and we have a few different sizes in our cellar. I don't know if any of you have visited or seen photos, but there are 2 specifically designated for our Mourvèdre, and those get topped throughout the year with a little bit of Grenache as well. But you just get this really nice marriage of that kind of wet rock, and a lot of very delicate flavors can kind of come through because this doesn't see oak. So it's a different perspective kind of on this grape that we make a lot of blends, or our rosés as well see Mourvèdre. So again, like I was mentioning earlier, it's you get to try these grapes in a lot of different ways. So this is just kind of a fun project that we have. I really love this grape in general, so no matter what we're making, I typically have really good notes on it. But this one was bottled in, trying to think, was this the July bottling, Nate, or the August?
August.
Okay.
Yeah, late August, early September. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, it went through its fermentation and then it gets pressed. And so it would have been about, what is that, 9 months?
9.5 months, yeah. In
amphora. So yeah, it lives in its little amphora, and we top it every month or so, because these we see don't breathe quite as much as oak do. And So we just kind of taste it periodically, make sure that it's tasting good. But this makes its own wine. So Nate was also mentioning earlier that, we like doing projects and different like experiment. I mean, everything we're doing is kind of a trial, you could argue, but it's like when people ask about making a Grenache or a Mourvèdre, it's like we like doing single varietal things, and at that, playing around with different vessels that we have. So this is one that we really enjoy.
Yeah, and I think being able to taste this independently lets you know, like one of the things I mentioned, like back at the beginning when we were talking about the rosé, that a Mourvèdre can really bring like a nice savory quality to a lot of wines. So that's, kind of like our fifth flavor, right? Umami. Like Mourvèdre just has umami, like it just has it. And so it brings this really cool sometimes in French they call it like sauvage, so like a savage quality. Like there's sometimes like a grilled meat aspect to Mourvèdre, and like I think this one displays that of like it's always on the earthier side with like this kind of sauvage like grilled meat kind of thing. And but then it's got that like nice richness and roundness. A lot of that is assisted by the amphora. One of the interesting things about amphora is that they're made out of clay, terracotta, and clay is actually a charged particle. And so in a barrel, if you've got a barrel sitting there, and the yeast all settle down to the bottom of the barrel, in an amphora, they actually are electrostatically basically attracted to the sides of the walls. So instead of all the leaves being just down at the bottom with just a little bit of the wine in contact with it, in an amphora, the leaves are all the way around the wine. So you're getting, when the leaves start breaking down, they release really interesting proteins into the wine. And part of what that does is that texture, that smoothness, is from in part from the breakdown of these leaves. And amphora basically kind of assists that process by having more of the wine in contact with leaves, just because it's 360 degrees rather than just at the bottom. So part of the texture that you get in this wine is thanks to it being in amphora and being aged that way. So and again, so not seeing any oak, the textures that you're getting in this wine truly are then the only tannins are from the grape and the stems themselves. So there's never once was this in an oak barrel. So sometimes people might think this one's not so much. Last year, some people gave us some comments. They're like, "Oh, how much oak did you use?" I'm like, "None." Like that's
Oh, yeah.
that's tannins from the grapes themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this wine is a really nice experience overall because it's like, when we do use oak, we're only using neutral oak. So we have a few sources that we know their barrel programs and we trust them. And then we buy them used only, but we also clean them very well and steam them when they get to our property. So we're being pretty sustainable about our oak program. But then having these vessels too, it's like, we can be very sustainable and still get certain qualities that you would out of oak. So, like Nate was saying, people are like, oh, how much oak does this have? And actually, when I started, I'm pretty sure I asked you a few times that on certain wines, it's like, no, you can actually use stems and use other vessels and kind of play with that, and you can still get that texture. There's a lot of, there's a really nice herbaceous quality that comes through on this wine too. So it can pair with so many things. It's also a great standalone wine. I feel like when you open most of our wines, it's like from first sip to last, like depending on the temperature, you kind of go through different like waves with the wines. So that's nice because it keeps it interesting as you're drinking it, even if you're not pairing it with anything.
So when
Yeah,
you're
like,
doing the leaves like that, do you still stir them then, or are they distributed if you don't have to?
Yeah, you don't have to. That's the great thing about it. And we don't stir anything actually. Except, we do have a concrete egg, and the shape of an egg actually encourages these kind of circulation patterns. So the egg, in some ways, like stirs the leaves for us. But I would never open a vessel to stir, specifically because when you're stirring, you're also introducing a whole lot of oxygen. Because you're at cellar temp, and the cooler the temperature, the more readily oxygen will dissolve. Any gas will dissolve into solution. That's why you keep carbonated things cold, right? If you open up a warm carbonated thing, the CO2 all comes out of solution because gases want it to be cold. So if you have a cold cellar and you're stirring, you're actually adding a lot more oxygen. And we use like almost like such a small amount of sulfur. Sulfites, contain sulfites, which is in large part to protect against oxidation. And so we're basically not doing that very much. And so I want to minimize that disturbance. So I'd rather things happen passively. And so that's what's so nice about the amphora, is that's just a function of the vessel. The vessel does that for us without us having to open it and actively manipulate it and add oxygen to it, like as a byproduct of what we're trying to do. There's like a handful of occasions where we might stir a barrel, like specifically if in certain cases with like a stuck or sluggish fermentation, sometimes stirring a barrel can help because you kick up some more yeast and it might like help it kind of get over the hump and finish fermenting all the sugar. This happens more with like a whiter rosé wine, but even then, we try to not do it specifically for that kind of oxygen uptake issue I mentioned. But it is common practice in other wineries, particularly wineries that use, so you can use 350 parts per million of sulfites in wines in the United States. Demeter in the organic program allows you to use 100, and we use like 20 to 30. So, we're
And
like,
that's up to, by the way. So everyone's not necessarily adding that amount, but
So you're adding some, just very little.
Yeah, we add very little. We add enough to soak up the small amount of oxygen, basically, that happens during bottling, because the bottling process, of course, even though the bottles are sparged with nitrogen, so you try to get all the oxygen out of the empty bottle before you fill it, but there's some oxygen uptake there. So we add a small amount of that, mainly to counteract bottling. But we just got results back from just today, Micah. I don't know if you checked your email, but like we have those wines. The Glou Glou has 12 parts total sulfur, not free, but total. Like,
which
most
is so small.
Yeah, most winemakers would freak out if their free SO2 was at 12, meaning like, they're gonna have total sulfurs, closer to 350. I mean, they'll have total sulfurs certainly upwards of 100, and free sulfur of like 30 to 40, and like maybe 150 parts or total, but ours are like 12 total. So yeah, very, very low. And that's something that people talk about, do sulfites give me a headache and things like that? Like, not really, probably. Like bagged salads have more sulfur in them than a lot of wines. No one's talking about the bagged salads giving them headaches. Dried fruits, things like that, apricot and
French fries.
French fries, yeah. Fast food French fries have more sulfur in them than ours do. So probably not that, but I think there is some level of, like, I don't know, I don't want to use the word toxicity exactly, but like the next day, if you drink a lot of wines that have a lot of sulfur in it, I bet you're not going to be feeling that great. But it seems that if you have much lower sulfurs, it does seem to be kinder on your body.
Yeah. And I guess on that, I'm assuming you're with the kind of more natural ferments, you're not doing any sulfites at crush time, right?
Correct. Yeah, zero sulfur at crush. So our wines actually are just now. We have wines in our cellar from 2024 that have yet to get any sulfur at all. So they're coming up on 9 months completely sulfur free. Yeah. So we wait until kind of the last possible moment to add sulfur, because once you add sulfur, the wine moves to a different type of existence. And we want as much of its life in the cellar to be like more free to do what it wants to do. Like a lot of changes, like get sulfur as it's kind of intended to do, it like crystallizes things in terms of like it kind of like locks things in amber. So if you're really happy with where a wine is, yeah, you can add some sulfur because it's probably not going to change that much after that. But our wines are like living, breathing things. We don't filter them. We don't sterile filter them. So like they continue to have the yeast in there in the bottles even, and that's part of what allows them to age for longer than sterile wines age, because our wines are not sterile. But yeah, we wait a long time to add sulfur, and then we add very little is the be all and end all. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes literally the day before bottling.
Yes, like the Glou Glou. Yeah.
Yeah, which is really cool. I mean, people make the argument of like, oh, natural wine or low intervention wine, that must be so easy to make. But it's like, you really have to understand what you're doing. And, we're tasting daily, vessel by vessel, depending on what stage they're at. And I'll say, like, we're not opening every vessel every day, but what I mean is, depending on what we're doing, like if we're going to add sulfur or call something done with malolactic fermentation, or if we're doing a blending session, it's like we're taking a lot of notes, and people don't always do that. They just kind of group together, oh, this section of the vineyard, got pressed together. Let's like take a sample of 20 barrels and then make a call on it. And they might not even taste it, but we're actually looking at numbers and then also tasting it and comparing and understanding what's going on, and when and if we need to add something, blend something. So it's a little bit just different process, I'll say. Each style of winemaking has its own challenges and things, but it allows us to make a very sustainable product.
Yeah. And sorry for the nerdy questions. It's the whole winemaker curse, but
no, Nate Wall is very excited right now, especially.
do you inoculate for mallow, or is that all natural too?
That's all natural. Yeah. So, and again, with a lot of our vessels, they're porous vessels. And so, and we keep these barrels for a very long time. And obviously the concrete is going to outlive all of us. And the amphora as well. I mean, there's still literally, millennia old amphora from like ancient Rome that you can make wine in today, right? So these amphora will be around a while. Point being, though, is that these are a lot of the things we use, you have to kind of take the approach like you're cooking with cast iron, not Teflon, right? And so it's like you're like seasoning these vessels in a way. And so because you can only clean them so much, and it's actually the process of making wine in them is kind of what keeps them clean, just like the process of cooking in a cast iron kind of keeps it clean. And so we never have to do that, because since it's always had malolactic fermentation, for example, go through in these barrels, in these concrete tanks, in these amphora, it's going to go through it again. If we were doing things in stainless steel, that might be a little tricky, because stainless steel can actually get like really, really clean. And like to be clear, we have a pretty good cleaning profile protocols for all of our things, but there's only so clean that you can get a porous vessel, right? Because there's pores and like bacteria are tiny. But we do the best we can, but oftentimes it's that slight uncleanliness that actually helps the process. As long as it's all good stuff there, like we want that stuff to be there. So like we just we let it go through, and it never seems to have a problem. Yeah.
One last question, just because when we first started tasting your wines, especially the whites and rosés, to me sometimes had a cider kind of character to them. And then we looked you up on LinkedIn and found out that you used to make cider. Are there some techniques or things that from your cider background that have kind of carried over into the winemaking?
I think some of that cidery character is actually like some of the skin tannins of like white grapes always often come across as cider-like to me. And a lot of our grapes, of our white grapes, for example, Vermentino, will foot tread the Vermentino before it goes into the press. So like we're actually trying to get some skin contact. So even though it's not like a true orange wine, we're not going to ferment on the skins. But we do want to get some of that process before it's pressed off to juice, because like I was saying about the amber wine, there's a lot of really cool stuff in the skins. Like a lot of the aromatic compounds, like they're in the skins, and most white grapes are only in contact with the skins for like an hour or two in the press. And so all those amazing aromas you get in white wines, that's just from like 1 or 2 hours in the press before the skins are gone. With like some of our grapes, I kind of like want to give it a little more of that. So in the same thing, rosés inherently are going to have more skin tannins because they're red grapes. And so I think some of that cidery texture that you're picking up on is probably more of a tan or cidery component, is like a tannin a texture,
Okay.
because most of our wines, even our whites and our rosés, do have some level of tannin, like phenolic compounds in them, even though just because we leave them exposed to their grapes maybe for longer before we press them, to try to get a little more like out of those grapes before we press them.
Cool. Thanks.
Sure.
Nate, do you want to talk about the upcoming cider
I was
I was
project?
gonna
about to say.
Yeah, so speaking of cider, we have a whopping 20 gallons of cider from Troon
Whoa.
that we made this year, because we do have 2 acres, a little over 2 acres of cider apples, a couple hundred trees planted at Troon, and we were barely able to this year. Cider, you think vineyards take like a long time to establish, like apples, like trees take a very long time to start giving you a usable amount of fruit. So, and we also decided to so you can use dwarfing rootstocks, which is like short trees that come to fruition faster. But the reason they do that is because they have really weak root systems. And which is, if you're driving, especially in Washington, sometimes it can be confusing. You'll drive past something you think is a vineyard, and it's actually an orchard, because now people are using a lot of these dwarfing rootstocks, and they're even trellising their apples, because you can get more apples and you can get them faster. But for cider, that's not what you want. For cider, you want more of a vineyard approach. You want deep roots, like into the soil, like really getting that like terroir and that like interest and complexity. And so because of that, we had to use, larger trees that have better roots, and they take even longer to establish. But point being is that we made a little bit of cider this year, and it's pretty cool. We have like 40, I make it up a different number every single time I say this, because we keep planting different trees. We have like 45, 46 different types of French cider apple trees planted at Troon. We started planting them in 2019, so we've been able to get some fruit. And so we made some cider this year. We'll make a little more in 2026. Like, I don't know if we can sell, it might not be enough to sell, but in 2027, I feel pretty confident that we'll actually have actual cider from Troon. So organic biodynamic cider made from Troon. So we'll see. Maybe 2026. We'll have to see how many what it looks like. Because another thing that reminds me, that like when Micah was talking about like vintage variations, so a lot of places that like purchase their own fruit, they put in orders for I want 5 tons of this, 8 tons of that, 7 tons of this. So that's why their blends are pretty similar year after year, because they're buying tonnage. So they always buy the same tons. But we're farmers, right? And so like we make wine from what we grow. And some years we might have like, 10 tons of Grenache and 15 tons of Syrah. And some years that might be flip-flopped. And like we might have, more Syrah, or, more Grenache and less Syrah. Or so inherently, the grapes that we have year to year is also a reflection of vintage, because certain varieties do better certain years. Some of that can be like one of the reasons we really like Mourvèdre at our site, amongst all the other reasons we were saying we love Mourvèdre, is it's a very late variety in terms of bud break, and we can suffer from early frosts, from spring frosts. And so some of those varieties, Grenache is the opposite. Grenache is very early. So if Grenache is out and like the buds are open and you've got this very sensitive bud that's fully open with just these little tiny leaves around it, and then you get a frost, that's going to damage that main bud. And there's a tertiary bud system, so it has other ones, even if this one dies, that can start growing, but those are much less fruitful. And so we'll have if it happens to be one of those years, we're going to have a lot less Grenache, for example, because the bud breaks early, and it may have had gotten knocked back by frost. Whereas Mourvèdre, which bud breaks much later, may have missed that frost altogether, and then it grows. So another kind of part of our equation and why our blends do seem to change maybe more year to year is that we make wine from what we grow. And so we're not just putting in orders like for a recipe, like Mother Nature is our recipe, and Mother Nature is constantly changing. So that's not just in how we put together our blends, but in even the amount of grapes we have any given year of each of these different varieties. So yet another aspect of that kind of estate vineyard.
Yeah, I'd also add to that, in addition to getting X amount of grapes from each block and then, divvying up what they're for, we're also not adding products like we've said before. But I mean, if you're buying a wine that pretty consistently tastes the same, even if you're picking the same grapes off the same property every year, like we are at Troon, we have guidelines on when we're picking them, and there's typically, like a range of numbers you're probably going to get for pH and sugar, but we've both worked at places where it's like, okay, this is what it came in at, and every year you have an exact target, and so you're going to add X amount of sugar and water and tartaric acid and other things right away to get your numbers to a certain point. And then you're going to use a certain yeast that is going to produce certain flavors. And so we're not using these grapes as part of a recipe. Like, they're really doing what they will do that year with our help. But you're actually getting the taste of that property, that vineyard, that terroir each year. And so the color might be slightly different on the same wine year to year. The taste might be slightly different. The composition, like Nate was saying, but that's kind of part of the fun to us too, is like, then maybe you get the Glou Glou every year, but it's going to be slightly different vintage to vintage, which is, I think, a little more fun. It shows each year on our property, and that we're growing all of those ourselves. We're, practicing biodynamics. So you actually get this little time capsule basically of what the year 2024 was on block 3 when you drink that Syrah or whatever wine it is.
Somebody mentioned to us once that the sign of a good winemaker is that you're able to take the fruit and make good wine no matter what happens agriculturally or with weather or whatever. You're given what you're given, and you make wine with it, and you decide how to nurture it to make good wine with, and letting the fruit just do whatever it's going to do. And just know that vintage is just, that's what the vintage gave you, right?
I really like that, though. That's nice.
Well, and interestingly, I mean, that is a reason why we have 20 grapes planted here, right? 20 different grapes, because historically, like throughout the centuries, this is exactly how people did it. Like before we had all these like technological, like enological additives, and, you can add anything from a bag nowadays. The way that they dealt with varying climate year to year, just the vagaries of Mother Nature and of growing agricultural product, is by planting different grapes that some did better some years, some did better in other years, but you always had a hedge, like if something just did not produce, you know what, that probably means this thing was great, and vice versa, right? And so we have 20 different grapes, and that's why so many of our wines are blends, because like they all like play well together. Like that's why they've been grown together for centuries, right? Like a lot of the times the shortcomings of one grape is perfectly made up by the strengths of another grape, and there's a synergistic effect. And again, yeah, some years this one grape might not be great, but this other one will like fill in, and so they just work together. And that's kind of how you more naturally deal with a lot of variability, both out in the vineyard as well as like in the cellar in your ferments, right? So yeah, that's the simple way of dealing with kind of really complicated stuff is just to have a whole lot of options.
Yeah, well, it's diversity, and because we see the same thing. I make wine, but she makes fantastic tomato sauce, tomato paste, and she has either 9 different varieties, I think, or something.
Yeah, 9 different varieties of tomatoes, because I never know from
Oh, wow.
season to season. Some of them do super well some years, and others it's like, why didn't that not do well this year? But then the other ones do great. So
Every year it's a different one that's the best producer. So
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same
Yeah, we have
mentality.
like different favorites, right? Like different years, we have different favorites. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So Troon, you're on the clock here. In 3 years, what are you going to be bragging about the most?
I like that question.
Micah, what do you think? You're kind of taking this all in as fresh eyes.
I mean, some of our Grenache is pretty exciting right now. And I love the way I don't want to throw any spoilers, but I'm like, I like the way our rosé is going. Our rosés are going this year. I think, though, trying to make more wines in general, and like this was a question earlier about Cinsault, like Nate and I have tried a lot of wines recently from various AVAs and producers of single varietals that like we're growing and right now are going into blends. But then when we're going through either blending trials or just tasting, certain lots on whatever day it may be, like we'll notice certain things are tasting really good by themselves and we'll be like, oh, we would bottle that by itself, but we know that it's probably going to go into one of these blends. So I think just understanding every block a little more, and then being able to not only keep producing great blends like we're making right now, but then make some other little fun things based on how they're tasting in barrel and in amphora and concrete. We have a lot of, like we said earlier, everything is kind of a trial. Like there are, what is it? I think like 80 lots technically, right, Nate, that we have in our system.
Yeah, well, I mean, we make something like 60 different picking decisions, right? Because of the different, and then of those different picks, the same grape might go a couple different ways, right? So some might be destemmed, some might be certain like 30% whole cluster, some may be like 75% whole cluster. So
different press fractions.
Right. So I would say we probably have more than that.
Yeah. But I'm not sure exactly how we will break things up, but I'll just say that trying everything separately in the process of trying to figure out how we're going to blend has made us realize how great a lot of things are already tasting, even though we work with a lot of very young vines. So we would like to kind of continue doing experiments, and then maybe even, although it will just cause a little more work on our end, but making even more wines, I think. And feel free to tell us what you like drinking too. But we've already seen a few things go a certain way like this vintage. So I would just hope to be able to showcase many different varietals and, fun things that we have going on where you can just be experiencing that and they don't all end up in a blend, although they're great in the blends too. So if you can,
Micah, but like we do have a standalone Grenache that is currently in Amphora that will be bottled.
that's what I know.
Yeah, we can tease that. That's okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I
wasn't sure.
This is the place where you can tease those things. So I think there's another thing that you can tease if you want to, Nate, that we haven't spoken about, He Who Shall Not Be Named.
We're not teasing that yet.
See, that's why I'm not saying anything. But I would just, after pressing everything this year, so like the white grapes or the grapes that will be made into rosé, we press and we're tasting the whole time. And so we get to actually taste that block and that single varietal and experience that by itself. And then, it carries on in the cellar. So to be able to be trying all of these things for the first year this year, working at Troon, I already think it would be cool if like everything gets showcased at some point. But especially the Amphora, I mean, we love the Amphora Mourvèdre that we covered today. But like Nate mentioned, there are many different Grenache Amphoras right now going, which is kind of cool. We love Grenache. We love the, I'll say my favorite rosé of this last year, so of 2024 vintage, was the Mourvèdre Rosé. That is looking, it's tasting delicious right now. And we will be starting blending sessions soon, but nothing really to complain about, honestly.
Oh, yes. Well, actually, we were calling it Vol de Port, by the way. So, yes.
Yeah.
That is the comment. Meg, it looks like you have a comment.
I know. So I will say what other vintners are saying. So I spend a lot of time in the Willamette Valley. We're very different than a lot of the folks that I get to hang out with on a regular basis, just in varietal. So I think that obviously people enjoy us because they are tasting lots of really interesting things that they're not producing up here. I do think that it's not me. It's Nate, it's Micah, it's Craig, it's
Group effort. Group effort.
Group effort.
We're on the production team.
Oh, true. I am on the production team.
You are.
I will say that I think that people do understand what we are trying to do in the sustainability realm, because everybody has been so forthcoming and so willing to share how we have been able to do things and what we are doing and what the challenges have been. I think specifically one of the best examples is there is a friend of mine who I have known for many years, who is a winemaker up here, who was working for another winery that was looking to get their regenerative organic certification. And Nate and Garrett were incredibly helpful. All that I did was just say, here are their email addresses. But they were able to really help guide them through a lot of the process and take a lot of that off their plate so that they didn't have to like start from ground zero. So I think that people definitely understand what we're trying to do, but that's because I think everybody is so generous with their time and their knowledge. Nate, Micah, do you have anything else that you want to add to that?
No, yeah, I mean, we're trying to be really transparent, right? Like, I mean, literally in everything we do, that's why we were some of the first people to start putting ingredients on the back of our labels, because we absolutely do not fear what those ingredients say, because it just says grapes and like minimum effective sulfites. I mean, that's it. Whereas a lot of other wineries are like kind of nervous if if the backs of their wines make them look like the highly processed and manipulated products that they are. There's been a lot of pushback in the wine industry. For some reason, we have been completely exempted from telling people what the heck is in this product that they're consuming. I don't know why wine has gotten a free pass for so long, but it has. In Europe, that's finally changed. We hope it changes here soon, because we are all for it, because we want people to know that we don't add anything to our wines. And I think our wines are what most people think most wines are, and that is absolutely not correct. Most wines have dozens of things in them. Our wines are now the rarity, certainly in terms of New World wines, kind of younger wine regions that didn't have centuries before industrialization of making wine. All a lot of new wine regions know is industrial winemaking. And so our winemaking practices aren't that. Ours are pre-industrial, winemaking before these things were available. And we think they make actually better, more complete, more interesting wines, and certainly a better reflection of the farming that we spend so much time, painstakingly doing. So
the other thing that I will just say, Meg, to your question is that, like, again, last night when I had the opportunity to pour for these master sommeliers, several of them were from Europe, and were very appreciative of the fact that we do have a QR code on the back of all of our bottles that will take them to an information page about that wine. It will give them the pH, it will give them the chemistry of everything, it will give them harvest date, and then winemaker notes as well. And I think that that was something that was commented on specifically by people who were not from this country.
Yeah,
Europe
also.
is now requiring that.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was just saying Europe is now requiring that, and a lot of people are using QR codes in Europe now. So I think that's going to end up here by requirement. But we've been doing it, because we want to. We want to educate people.
Yeah. I think in addition to the sustainability, it kind of goes in hand with the fact that we just want to be intentional and very transparent. So, I mean, there are people that the way they drink wine is like they want to go to the store, they want to go to the same store, buy the same Pinot that they know tastes the same way. And that's okay. Like, everyone wants to enjoy wine a different way. And sometimes people add certain things at certain times for a reason. So this is just, stylistically, we choose a certain way to make our wine, but then it also really goes full circle on the whole property. And like we were mentioning earlier, it's not just that we want to put on our label that we're Demeter certified or biodynamic. It's like we're constantly having meetings about like, oh, how do we change this thing? How do we do this differently? How do we, if we can save water, save energy, save time, we do. And so I think we find that important across the entire company and business. It's not just about doing requirements that fulfill whatever it is to get our audit done with. It's like, as people, this is kind of how we just like think on a daily basis. It's really refreshing to work at a company like that. So we've been able to just connect with a lot of other people that are of the same mindset, and be really lucky to be pouring at events and attending events where collectively I feel like a lot of people in Oregon are trying to get more people certified and on board with being more sustainable.
Well, we're Amish, and we have to, our horse is going to stop pulling the wheel that powers our computer and lights.
You need some solar power.
So we're
Come to Troon.
sun doesn't shine here long enough. So we're going to sign off for the night, but thanks so very much for the
This is so
experience. It's really
informative.
good.
Thank you.
Oh,
Bye to
good.
all.
Yeah,
Good
no,
to see you
we well
both.
exceeded our time, so thank you for staying with
Yeah,
us.
sorry about that.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
for being so generous with your time and staying late with us.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you for joining us, and yeah, I guess we'll do this again on the next release. Meg, is that probably the plan?
That is absolutely the plan. Provided that you two are not in the middle of harvest.
Yeah, harvest
Ah.
is going to be the tricky part.
We
Yeah.
might just be
We might do
covered
it
in
ahead.
grapes.
Yeah,
Meg might be like running around trying to
it will
have
be.
talk about her wine.
Just do it on the crush pad.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you have a
exactly.
GoPro. You
We
got a
might-
GoPro that shows us what you're doing.
Yeah,
That's a good idea. Yeah, you could just
Yeah.
share one of those for a day.
no problem. But I mean, it's possible we might do it ahead of the next wine club so
Yeah.
that we have more of a chance of having you two available at that time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's just wonderful to hear what you're doing, and being able to listen to your process and all. It really helps us to appreciate the wine even more. And so thank
And
you.
putting up with
Yeah.
my nerdy questions. So,
You look-
No, they're great. We're glad you enjoyed. You're gonna have to tell us what sauce pairs best with which wine.
Yes.
tomato sauce pairing.
Okay, we could do that.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. Enjoy your wines.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you soon.
Very
Thank
good.
Good night.
Bye, all.
Right.